So you might be wondering, what is loop speed? Well, loop speed is just a mechanic in SA2 that allows you to run through loops. Take this loop, for example. If loop speed wasn't a thing, then you'd have to run up this manually. But since loop speed's a thing, it automatically sends me where I want to go. And so for this part of the loop as well. So the short of it is loop speed is basically the mechanic that allows loops to work. If I were to hold any direction, not just forward, any direction, when I hit this loop, automatic loop, it moves me along. Oh, fuck. Quick addendum here. I wanted to show this with the RAM display, which shows it in a better graphical detail. The particular field I'm focusing on is the status field. For example, if Sonic's on the ground, then the status is on the ground. So if I were to go enter at loop speed, you can see that it starts with automated section. Automated section is what the RAM display uses to describe the loop speed status. If I were to just enter a loop speed trigger and just hit a direction, then eventually I would activate that activation or that automated section. Particularly from limited analysis, it looks like every time you go into a new one, while holding a direction, it activates automatically. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, though. A loop speed trigger looks like kind of a bubble. It looks like this blue thing, and it has like a radius and all that jazz. Basically, certain parts of loops will have these loop speed triggers if it wants to force you onto a set path, which you can see by these balls here. You can also see that it applies to this entire half of this loop and only the back half of this loop, which seems to be using even the same bubble. So as you can see, I'm holding a direction and I'm not moving at all. However, as soon as I hit that ball and I'm holding a direction, Sonic will immediately go into the loop speed state and start running, like so. How this loop speed state actually works is probably a little more complicated, but Brian has explained it many times before, and you can look that up in the Discord if you're curious. But the basis of it is that with that property, homing attacking sends you straight down in relative to the angle of gravity. So I'm gonna hit this loop speed bubble while jumping, so I have the loop speed state now. And since I have it, if I homing attack, Sonic will immediately go straight down, as expected. So it's a matter of jumping into this ball that allows you to basically arbitrarily redirect wherever direction you want to go. And that direction is decided by gravity. There are a few case examples that I want to go over just to demonstrate this loop speed idea in practice. The first one is Loop Easy, the Metal Harbor loop speed. There are two ways to activate this loop speed. The first one is the one I've shown already, where I jumped into a bubble and went straight down. That is a matter of jumping before hitting the loop speed trigger, or, doing something like that. Going into the loop speed trigger to gain the loop speed property, and then homing attacking afterwards. And given you hit the bubble and you have the right angle of gravity, which is based off of where you jump off this loop, you will get sent forward, as so. This one is a little bit tricky. You do have to be on the very edge and then hit a tight jump, hit the loop speed trigger, and then homing attack afterwards. But it does show how this actually works. You do hit this loop speed trigger, and then you do this homing attack, and as such, the game tries to force you downward, but because your angle of gravity is tilted slightly up, you get pushed forward instead. At a downward angle, of course. There is another way to activate this loop speed property, though, and that is the neutral stick loop speed. This was a common thing in TASes, usually Radical Highway, and it wasn't really explored until Brian told Devu some information, and Devu labbed the shit out of it. So shoutouts to Devu, and Brian, of course. So how does that work? Basically, if you are in a loop speed trigger, but you're neutral sticking, if you jump, and then after jumping, shortly after jumping, you hold a direction, you gain that loop speed property again. But what that allows you to do is basically do loop speeds in a lot more places. Basically, just because a lot of loops have bigger loop speed triggers that are wider, and it's rare that you can like get behind a loop and keep your gravity and keep a lot of your speed. This is easy enough to where that is possible, where you can enter a loop speed trigger, but stuff like radical highway loop speeds, those benefit drastically from neutral stick loop speeds. So as you can see, I'm holding neutral, and if I do it correctly, I'll get a loop speed. As you can see, I have the level editor up again, and as you can see, I got a loop speed there. Simply from neutral sticking, jumping, while being inside a loop speed trigger, and then pressing forward immediately, which then activates loop speed, and then you can homing attack and, you know, redirect yourself from there. Here's another example. This is one of the common cases. The green forest loop speed that you use to get onto the wall. So this is the idea where you're on the loop, you go off the loop and into the loop speed trigger with the angled gravity that you get from being on the side of the loop, and then homing attacking as such. And if you were to do this right, you would get a homing attack that it directs you to this tree. And then you can continue your loop speed state upon landing, unless you neutral stick. It's important to note that if you neutral stick while landing in a loop speed state, because this loop speed state lasts forever until you hit something or, you know, go neutral, you will automatically keep running. And for the purposes of this, that's what allows you to run on the tree. So let me do it again. As you can see, I'm holding a direction. If I were to stop, Sonic falls off. But if I were to keep holding up, Sonic would keep running. Here's a closer up shot of the loop speed. I'll play it back in slow-mo just so you can see what I'm doing. But as you can see, like, I'm hitting the loop speed bubble by getting out of it and then looping around to hit it again and then homing attack. Most people struggle with this, depending on how quickly or how late their homing attack is, because I can go get this loop speed and homing attack and then go straight down. Yeah, as long as I keep holding a direction. If I were to go neutral, then I wouldn't go anywhere. But if I held a direction, I would go straight down. Fun fact, you can actually prolong that loop speed state if you just keep bouncing, but I don't think there's been an application found for that yet. That's just a fun little task thing for you. Also, here's just some full screen footage of wall run if you want to see it for some reason. Just to show what inputs I'm doing. Another example of loop speed is hex skip itself. This is just a quirky little loop. So you just enter the loop speed trigger, you bounce to keep it, or bounce to get off the loop, while keeping the loop speed property, and homing attack to make it across, like so. Now, if I were to do that correctly, it would be funnier, but the point still stands. Also, keep in mind that the note I made about loop speed stuff actually applies here really drastically, and that's why you see most people, when they land from hex skip, do a bounce excel to either cancel out of it. Alternatively, you could just neutral stick. You can actually get some funny, quirky loop speed stuff I'll show that off right now. This only stops when I either re-land from a surface, like such, or if I neutral stick, which allows me to move again. As you can see, here's the loop speed trigger. So if I were to start running here, I would be on this automatic loop. These balls are actually basically the size of the path, maybe a little less on the right sides, but what that means is you can't just do a bounce here and get it. You'd have to go through this ball in order to actually get that loop speed, of which, as you can see, Sonic would be like right here. You would do a spin dash to hit one of these balls, and since you can bounce off this wall and do a loop speed, you can't. That won't make it over here though. So you would do a bounce to get off this loop while maintaining that loop speed property, and then homing attack. And once again, like so, the epic ball comes in to save the day. Note that you can be sent in a lot of different directions depending on your gravity angle, the weight, the direction you're holding when you're homing attack, stuff like that. So that's worth keeping in mind. In a lot of scenarios, it won't matter. Like Green Forest Water, it kind of does matter. Looped Easy, it kind of does matter. But stuff like this is where it would matter. But that's kind of just something you get used to with time. And since I forgot to show it off, I might as well show a neutral stick loop speed in more than one place. This is the Radical Highway loop speed. There's multiple of them, but this is the easiest one. So what I do is you would unroll, hit the wall with this spin dash, so you hit the loop speed trigger, and then wait for Shadow to slightly kind of turn to the left because of the slopage of the loop, and then do a jump while holding neutral. And then immediately after jumping, I think you have like a 1 or 2 frame window. I think the frame windows change between each loop in the game, where if you start holding a direction, you get the loop speed property and can use the homing attack to send yourself straight down. So if I were to do it correctly, you see how Shadow got stuck there, and as soon as I homing attack, I went on the loop. That was loop speed, and also this was loop speed. Notice that I didn't get the loop speed there despite hitting the trigger, because I didn't hold a direction fast enough, or maybe I held a direction too early. Who knows? The world is your oyster. And just to show you that I'm not lying, I'm gonna do it with this. So the short and sweet of it is, loop speed is what makes loops work, and they're controlled by bubbles. And if you enter a bubble, you get that loop speed property if you're holding any direction, not just forward. You can abuse this by entering a loop speed trigger while in the air. Without, you have to be outside a loop speed trigger and then go in one, and then you get that loop speed property, and then you can homing attack, and depending on the situation, you can arbitrarily launch yourself in a arbitrary direction. Some conditions are different between loop speeds, most notably the neutral stick loop speed, which requires you to be neutral stick, but then immediately after jumping, hold a direction so you actually get the loop speed property while inside a loop speed trigger. You have to neutral stick before entering it, of course, but the point still stands. It's about the bubble. You go into the bubble while in the air, you get the funny property, and it's really funny. So yeah, that's all I can really say about loop speed. I think it's important to have a conceptual understanding of how the mechanic works and how you actually abuse it, rather than just learning inputs, because if you don't understand what the mechanic is, how do you know when you're going to mess up, when things don't work? I think that's very crucial when it comes to understanding stuff like Loop Easy or Wall Run or something like that. So I figured I'd just compile what I know and put it in a video. It's very much a ramble video. I would like it to be more formal, but I'm tired. Shoutouts to Brian PSO for writing so much about Loopspeed over the years. Also, the Tassers who originally messed around with it in the first place. The old Tassers, Fusion of Aria, Talis, well. Shoutouts to Divu for revolutionizing neutral stick loop speeds in actual like RTA runs. And shoutouts to all the people that I learned the shit from over the years. Bye bye.